Greetings, all you happily miserable accursed. Happy if you're a fan of the Toronto Argonauts this morning. Miserable if you were pulling for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I was pulling for the Argonauts because, as a good Saskatchewanian, nothing makes me happier than a beating laid on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I'm David Herle with a 3-question Grey Cup poll for our political panel. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz and Kory Teneycke. Number 1, how many 420-gram bags of Hawkins cheesies, otherwise known as the Big Boy, did you go through during the game last night? Or at the very least, did you have Ripple chips and dip made with sour cream and French onion soup powder? 2, did you consume those snacks with a larger than usual quantities of rum and coke, rye and ginger, or beer? Wine or any variety of disgusting hard seltzer drink does not count. And 3, can you even call yourself a Canadian if you weren't doing any of the above on Grey Cup Sunday? I watched the game, and I couldn't believe it. I thought Toronto going in there with their backup quarterback, without Kelly. Winnipeg had looked so dominant against the Riders the week before. But that Toronto defense, ball hockey defensive backs.
Well,
Scott, have you seen it? Yeah, Kory?
I'm embarrassed I didn't watch it, but I did watch a sporting thing last night.
A sporting thing.
You
sound like a passionate athletics fan.
I watched the Jake Paul Tyson fight because I was traveling on Friday and missed it, and I wanted to, as you know, a 50-year-old man, wanted to see if an old guy could beat the snot out of a lippy young kid. And apparently the answer was
It's like a cultural moment for your
apparently
people.
The answer was, well, I already knew what the answer was because I did see what the result of the fight was, but I wanted to watch it.
No, but it was really important to me, actually, Kory, too, because I realized, I walk around the streets still thinking like I'm 25 years old. Like, I walk around the streets thinking, if I got into a fight, I could take that guy. If that guy over there cut me off, I fought that guy, I could take that guy. And Friday night with Tyson was a very strong reminder, no, I couldn't.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't. That guy would beat the living fuck out of me.
Yeah, I got melted off in a bar the other day, and then I found myself just biting with my boxing gloves the whole time. And I thought, this could go bad for me. Not to mention my ass was hanging out of my pants as I talked to my son. That has actually happened in my house. I did watch the Grey Cup. I watched a bit of the Grey Cup. Unfortunately, Benny had a hockey game at the same time, but the arena had a little bar place where you could go. And so before the game, before the puck was dropped, and then right after, we went back in and we watched. And I was like, I was astonished. I was astonished that the Argos were as dominant. I also think you're wrong. I think you should have been cheering for Winnipeg because my high school football coach, Pat Carty, God rest his soul, always used to say, cheer for the team that beat you, because then you can say you only ever lost to the champs, which I've found it hard to do that sometimes, but I've tried to always follow that advice. So anyway, congrats to the Argos.
So you've cheered for the teams that beat the Canadians in the playoffs?
I have, because you have to hope, and I teach my boys that. At least you can say, well, the only team that was able to beat us were the champs.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I've also carried that into election campaigns.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's
we only lost to the Conservatives.
in there too.
Yeah, well, 2018.
I'm not cheering for any of you fuckers to win, I'll tell you that.
All right, here's the rundown this week. Suddenly got all quiet on Liberal leadership front. Does this mean the challenge to Trudeau's leadership is over? Our cursed clipping is a little different this week. I want to discuss a piece in Ted Gioia's Substack, The Honest Broker, the 6 new rules of communicating. Then we'll knock this question around for a while. Does the incoming Trump administration represent any kind of political opportunity for the governing Liberals? And finally, Gordon Pinsent wraps things up with our Hey Yous. So, guys, a few weeks ago, there was a lot of chatter about a dissident group of members of parliament. There was a caucus meeting. A bunch of people went up to a mic, said some tough things in very gentle, deferential ways, but asking the prime minister to leave. And he blew them off the next day. And other than a few people saying they were mad about that, we haven't heard anything since. And he's now been off traveling around the world. Since then, we've had the U.S. election. I guess maybe everybody in the Liberal Party is waiting to see if the party gets a bump out of that. But Jordan, do you think Trudeau is home and cleared out? No? He's going to run?
Well, I think he's going to run, but I don't think he's in the clear. I think that things are maybe a bit dormant right now, owing to some of those circumstances. And specifically, I think people waiting to see what the election of Trump is going to do to their numbers is a big part of it. But, there's a basic law of physics here. That type of energy can't be destroyed. It can only go somewhere. And so I think that we are likely to see, if there's no real improvement, if we head into the holidays, we head into the rise of Parliament at the end of December and things haven't moved at all, then I think you're likely to see this coming back, because that is the last sort of viable potential window, really, where he could maybe be pressured to think about his future over the break. So I don't think it's gone. I think, and I also, as I've said before, I don't think there's any magic in Trump's victory for them. We've seen, yet certainly no transmutation of Trudeau's personal numbers, which is really what would be required to address some of the things that people within his own caucus are concerned about. So I think they bought themselves some time. They had some pretty smart issue management in there. Obviously, Andrew Bevin coming in as campaign director and putting out a couple ads at breakneck speed, that combined with the Prime Minister's travel, I think, has taken the pressure off in the immediate moment. But I don't think it buys peace in the long term. And the folks who have expressed a lack of confidence about Trudeau are not gone. I think they may just be waiting for another moment to express it.
Right. Scott, what are you hearing?
Not much. And I think that's an indication of a couple of things. One, I actually think that the U.S. election has had a dampening effect, not just because it's like, oh, well, let's wait and see if it's a boost. I think also it's had a dampening effect culturally within the caucus and the party, feeling like, my God, the stakes are now really high, and it feels cheap, and it might look cheap to run at the leader in a moment when the country has to sort of gather itself and the government has to gather itself to face this overwhelming challenge of how to engage with a new Trump administration. But those same factors, it seems to me, that same cultural, oh my God, the stakes are this high, at some point start to turn on the prime minister. You get on the other side of Christmas and people start saying, look, 57%, according to this week, Nick Nanos is just the latest in a string of polls that say more or less the same kinds of things. 50% of Canadians, and I know Canadians don't get to vote on the Liberal leadership, 57% of Canadians think that he should leave and not be the Liberal leader. 24% only say that he should stay on. And there's going to be, and there have been, endless polls of this kind. And so I think when you get to Christmas, on the other side of Christmas, when you get on the other side of January 20th, and Trump starts to play cards, big, heavy cards that land with a thud, I think then people start saying, Jesus Christ, man, maybe the stakes are too high for the country and for the government to leave somebody in place who's got such a flimsy hold on popular opinion. And Manley's an idiot. His political instincts are ashtray dull. But that issue of, well, wait a second, like who and how are we going to engage with the Trump administration? I think that will start to become a problem for the prime minister on the other side of January 20th. So I don't know how these guys don't have a plan. They don't have a champion, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what happens, which takes me to my second point, which is if there are liberals that really think that the prime minister should leave, then it seems to me increasingly there's only one true path that's going to happen now if he's determined to stay. And that is the logical and traditional and eternal path, which is one of these people who might want to succeed him needs to step up in public and say, I'm going to form a parade and you can fall in behind me. I'm taking him on. And I don't necessarily see any of the people, the potential leadership candidates doing that. I don't see the most likely option would probably be Carney, I guess, because he's an outsider. Maybe he would have the freedom to do it.
Christie, maybe?
Well, Christie, yes, but I don't think Christie's candidacy, I think that can be dismissed as it's too external. She's not a serious threat, lack of French, Quebec, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a tougher one and it's more expected from her. Carney, I think, would be the one that would be an intriguing external challenge, but I don't think it's in Mark's composition to do that. I don't know that he wants it that bad, and I don't know that he would want it that way. This is all speculation. It's not like I've had these discussions with him in earnest or something. But I think increasingly the answer to your question of is this leadership crisis over for Trudeau, I think it's going to continue to dog his leadership and his prime ministership. I think it is likely to condemn him to a terrifically devastating outcome. But I think unless somebody steps up and says, for the love of Christ, we need an alternative, and I'm willing to be that person, whether they're a Heseltine who leads the pack so that someone else emerges, or whether they are, in fact, a Paul Martin. I think unless and until that occurs, I don't know that this thing's going to resurge and be a sincere threat to his leadership.
Yeah, I think, Kory, the problem, the reason why nobody wants to do what Scott's doing is because there's a general hypothesis that the person who wields the sword doesn't get the crown, and that whoever leads the charge is unlikely to get to be leader. Do you think that's true?
I think it's largely true. I'm not going to argue with you guys over the internal workings and machinations of the Liberal Party, but
come on, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So
I was going to say, why? Because we're insiders?
Well,
it's a movement, not a party.
Yeah, it's a cult of personality right now, and not a party. But I think that the window has for a long time been this summer is the more likely time you're going to see him go. It increasingly looks likely to me that the NDP are going to back the Liberals on the budget through some sort of deal. I hear rumors of conversations going on around what it would take to get support for the budget. So I would hazard to guess that if the NDP support stays where it is right now, it's going to be in their interest to try to do something like that. But I don't think we're going to see an improvement in his numbers as a result of Trump. But that is clearly the bet that a lot of people are making. And I think you guys are right to point out that there's maybe a bit of wait and see going on with respect to that. And also, I also agree that there's a bit of deference in a moment of, I'm not going to go so far as to say national crisis, but serious concern. There is a rally around the leader element that occurs, and which I think is also appropriate. But I don't think it's going to be better. And I think, I do agree that the stakes are very high, but I also think that agreement that the stakes are high actually pushes you towards trying to seek an earlier mandate, trying to have clarity in terms of who's going to represent Canada in those conversations. And I think you're seeing premiers starting to step into that void due to the weakness of Trudeau. And I think you're going to see more of that. Look, this is an important moment for us, and it's going to define what our economy looks like. Maybe not just for the next 4 years, but maybe for a lot longer than that, depending on what kind of renegotiation happens with CUSMA and what sort of tariffs we're staring down the barrel of. So I think if nothing improves, and maybe even if things get worse, which I think they will between now and the summer, there is a window that opens that doesn't require somebody wielding a knife, where it's more once again, the Mulroney situation where it's, I want to stay. Okay, I'm going because I know I'm going to get absolutely slaughtered. And the big thing that these guys, I think, have been waiting for and hoping for and focused on is, well, if Trump gets in, it's going to shake the table in such a way that people will open their hearts and minds in a way that they wouldn't prior to that to Trudeau and his messaging, and reject Trump and, think that Poilievre is like Trump. I think these are all the longest of long shots. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think any of those things are going to happen, but what I think doesn't really matter. I think they think that. I think that's their operating premise. And until that is being proven to be false hope instead of faint hope, I think they're going to stick with them. And, it'll be this summer is sort of the last window. They don't have to go next fall. They can go a whole year later than that if they want to. And if he decides to leave over the summer, maybe you're pushing into the following year for provincial or for a federal election campaign, and you're going to see a leadership between the summer and Christmas.
Well, Jordan, I have to go to you after that because Kory's put an interesting hypothesis on the table that I had kind of rejected, to be honest, and that is that the Liberals have time past the budget. I had sort of assumed that the budget was going to be where this government ended. Once Singh did the end of the confidence and supply agreement, I didn't think we were going to make it to the fixed election date, much less past that, which I had at one point thought we would do. Mm-hmm. So what is your sense of how much time the Liberals have left in government?
I still think it's unlikely they're going to make it past the budget, given the current circumstance. And look, I think that Singh and the NDP have been clear, as long as there are some substantial gains for them on the policy side to have, they're going to continue to talk with the Liberals about how they might support or not support on a vote-by-vote basis. But there's still a lot of votes between now and the budget. So they're going to be squeezing juice all throughout that period. And they're also, of course, not dumb. They're keeping an eye on what the Liberals' numbers are, what Trudeau's numbers are. And I think in the same way that we saw them make some pragmatic decisions about ending the confidence and supply agreement when they start to see it pull down Singh's own numbers, I think you're going to see that same calculus remain in play. And obviously the stakes of a support through a budget are larger than the stakes of support vote by vote leading up to that budget. So I think then that conversely makes the get that they would need to have on the policy side from that very big and probably likely larger than this government would be interested in delivering or capable of delivering at this point. So I still think it's a long shot. For sure they're talking. That's pretty normal. They have to talk in order to actually even make it through to the spring. But in terms of whether that would all come together, I think it's probably pretty unlikely at this point.
Yeah. So, Scott, what I'm hearing is that the Prime Minister really, really has it in his head that he has a special relationship with Canadians that none of these people like you or I understand. And that he knows them, he understands them, and they know him. And that when push comes to shove, in these circumstances, they're going to choose him. And I also understand that he has pretty much cut off anybody in his circle, people that love him, support him, have always had his back. If you're telling him to leave, you don't get access anymore to him. So he seems really dug in. And so I don't know what would change that other than, I guess, a succession of bad polls. But he seems to believe that those are wrong. Anyway.
Right. Well, if you believe they're wrong, and if you wall yourself off from those who might point out that they're not, then I suppose, short of the coyote showing up with an Acme package of dynamite, there's nothing to blow you out of that job in that position. So he's going to remain. And I've always been of the view that he would quit at Christmas. I've always held this notion that he would use Christmas to survey the field and ask himself, do I want my last act in politics, my last electoral effort, to conclude with a devastating loss that will then redefine my time in office and reposition me for the history books as a leader of the country and of my party? And that he would conclude, I'm going to follow my father's path, I'm going to follow the path of Brian Mulroney, and I will quit at the end rather than lose at the end. And I'm starting to think that was just, that was an absurdity. And what you want in a leader, what you arguably require in a leader, is someone who possesses those stores of self-confidence and resilience that allow them to push past the critics and the doubts and the challenges so that you can emerge victorious. Because no one gets this job easily. This job doesn't fall on anyone. You have to go out and fight for it. But those very same reservoirs of self-confidence and resilience can lead you into a terrible, terrible box canyon if you are not willing to put your head up and listen honestly to what's being said. And I think that's where we're headed. And I've said this millions of times, it's not with enthusiasm, but I just think that the party is headed toward a historic defeat. And I do not harbor the confidence that 22% is the bottom of the well. I think that we could go deeper. I think the Liberal Party can go straight into the sediment and soil that lies at the bottom of that well. We can go subterranean. And that really scares the living bejesus out of me for the institution that is the Liberal Party of Canada, to which, I've only dedicated my entire adult professional life.
Exactly.
But other than that, you're really ambivalent about it, though.
No feelings.
We've been talking here lately about Telus's efforts to secure, defend, protect their copper wiring. Pick any of those powerful, unyielding verbs, Hurley-Burleyites, their physical infrastructure. That's a mindset that carries over into how they keep and defend more abstract capital, data and privacy. It comes down to this. From cables buried in the ground to your personal information in the cloud, Telus believes trust is the cornerstone of every customer relationship. And in the context of our advancing digital age, it becomes even more critical. They just got out of field with a poll surveying Canadians and Americans about data privacy and ethical data practices. A few highlights. 79% of Canadians and 82% of Americans believe data privacy matters more now than ever. 87% of Canadians and 88% of Americans consider how a company handles data critical in whether they want to do business with them. 88% say trust in a business inspires them to use its products and services. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, not only do 82% of Canadians and 81% of Americans want it presented with absolute clarity and transparency, 74% say they want AI developed in consultation with regular folks, not just academics or tech people. As technologies like AI continue to evolve, Telus knows it's on them to bolster their core trustworthy data practices. They were the first organization in the world to achieve Privacy by Design ISO certification, the first telecom to sign the Fed's voluntary AI Code of Conduct, and they're regular leaders and participants in international forums to influence the continuing development of data and technology practices. All nice achievements, Hurley-Burleyites, but the key message is this. When it comes to efforts to strengthen trust and technology, Telus just won't stop. Learn more at telus.com/trust. So, Kory, if his head's where I described it to be, how many caucus members would it take to shake him out of that?
It doesn't take a ton, as we've talked about before. Like it doesn't take a ton, but they have to be willing to put something on the line in a way that I haven't seen to date. Like it's got to be something like what you saw happen with Stockwell Day, or what you saw happening with not just caucus members but staff as well around Patrick Brown. Like those are instances where there's no mechanism to get somebody out, but there's a big enough group of people that are basically willing to put all the chips on the table in caucus. And really, we haven't seen that. We've seen some very weak version of that, where I'm willing to sign my name at the top of a piece of paper without seeing who else is on the list. And I'm willing to go to the mic privately or semi-privately, I guess, in the context of a caucus meeting, but not minus a few individuals go in front of a microphone in front of TV cameras. So, like, I don't think the push from inside caucus has been heavy enough. So, I think it's less the number, David, and more the intensity that matters. But obviously, you need a certain critical mass of people. But I think they probably have enough people today. What they lack is intensity and conviction to go the distance.
I also think it's really interesting that we've compared this, I think, ad nauseum to Biden, but the role of somebody like a Nancy Pelosi really there isn't that person for the Liberal Party right now, and it underlines just the sort of complete hollowing out of the party as an institution, as an actor in this, which is arguably probably the most important discussion related to its ongoing survival, and it really has no horse in that race, and has no voice in that conversation. And I think that that actually puts unique challenges and definitely far more pressure on these caucus dynamics that would ordinarily just be one piece of a broader puzzle.
Process is so vital, right? I mean, the truth is they need a Eugene McCarthy. They need somebody that's willing to go out and win half the votes in New Hampshire and, stun Johnson and have him step aside. But that means that you think that requires a primary. There's no New Hampshire primary within the Liberal Party of Canada and within the caucus. And so there's no mechanism to call the vote unless there's such a widespread consensus, at least among the caucus, that you would literally have that secret ballot be held in defiance of the chair's wishes. So it's very difficult to imagine what the mechanism is based on having 24 members speak out. So what would the ante mechanism be to force that kind of mechanism in a caucus meeting? It's very, very hard to imagine. And clearly the Liberal Party infrastructure, the presidents of riding associations, the president of the party, the executive of the party, that's not a tool that will be wielded. It just doesn't exist in that format anymore.
No, but Scott, you need something like that because it seems clear that he's not going to be persuaded that he needs to step down. So he's going to have to be forced if he is going to go.
Yeah. I think that's right. But his view is, I didn't rent the car. I bought the car and I'll fucking drive the car until it falls apart if that's what it takes. Personally, I think I'm going to win the race, but it's my car, not yours. That's what you're getting from them.
There you go. All right. That's a pretty good place to end this conversation at. Okay. We have a clipping, and I don't know if you guys even subscribe to this Substack or not. It's called The Honest Broker. And I thought it was interesting this week. And Scott, I'll look to you to start this off, and I'll just read a little segment of it. The guy says, here's the reality. Rhetorical skills and speech making got degraded during the last decade. This top-down approach works best when it is rigorous, logical, and organized. But in an age of insults, taunts, and denunciations, speechifying starts to feel like browbeating, a never-ending harangue. Too much of public discourse in recent years has boiled down to powerful people screaming into a microphone from a bully pulpit. This is not what oratory should be, but it's what it has become. Here are the 6 new rules of engagement for politicians, broadcasters, and all aspiring experts. Number 1, you gain more trust when seated, not standing. Number 2, don't speak at people, speak with them. 3, an informal tone is more persuasive now. Even leaders must adjust to this. 4, conversations have more influence than speeches. 5, spontaneous communications delivered from a personal standpoint are considered more real than a script created by a team or speechwriter. And 6, sound bites and talking points are less impactful than storytelling, humor, and off-the-cuff comments. So, I had an Uber driver before the election, just the week before the election, tell me that he felt that he knew Trump in a way that he did not know Harris, because Trump talked a lot, and he could go to places and listen to Trump talk a lot. Whereas Harris, he only heard in clips from speeches where it was very scripted and very tight, and he didn't feel like he knew anything about her. So I just add that as an adjunct to this clipping. And since you're a speechwriter, in addition to your many other skills, what do you think?
I think it touches on a bunch of insights that are correct and feel right. Its conclusions are wrong. So I think that 5 of his 6 rules are correct. I think the first one is not right. The first one to say you get more trust sitting than standing. I don't think that there's anything inherent in that. I guess he's saying, well, I'd rather watch a fireside chat than a podium speech now. But great speeches and great speakers will always be able to stir a room and raise the roof beams. And so I don't think there's anything inherent about your posture. Obama could lay down and get people wound up. The rest of the things that he observes, like be conversational, talk with people, not at people. Those things have been true always. They've always been true. And so if they feel more true, it's just because Donald Trump, as a successful populist and a skilled architect of media, understands those 5 rules and has the ability and the instinct to follow them. So he can sound more conversational. He sounds unlike a politician. And I think that's what this guy's really driving at, is that you now are condemned. You will be at a disadvantage if you sound like a politician using the traditional tools and structures and norms of a politician, speaking in a speech, using a teleprompter, having a ABC logical structured your speech. Yeah, that's fine. But a boring speaker that's overstructured and artificial will always lose out to someone who feels spontaneous, real, and direct. He's missing one critical observation, in my view, which is that behind a bunch of this is, are you declarative? And a bunch of his rules lead to the endpoint of being declarative, that this person seems certain, that they have a certainty about them, a declarativeness to them that allows me to say, I know where they stand and I intend to follow them. And people have always responded to that. They responded to that when Churchill took to the radio waves and talked about our tiny island nation. And they responded to it when Bill Clinton would roll his R's and get the crowd going. And they're responding to it when Trump sounds different than any of the other political candidates. And the problem with Harris isn't that she's using those traditional tools. It's that she, on balance, sounded more like a traditional politician and wasn't as good at taking those tools and connecting with people. And so I don't think that the script for public and political communication is being written in a fundamental way. I think we're just reminded of what works and what doesn't, what's always worked and what doesn't. And the last point I would make is you won't see everybody blow up the script and blow up the playbook and do things differently, because many, 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 many people can't. Many people who are in elected life, many people who are politicians require the teleprompter, they require the structure, and they require the talking points. And a lot of our political structures, there is hardly any cabinet ministers who either have in Trudeau's cabinet right now, who have either the skill or the discretion to go on a television program and speak conversationally, directly, spontaneously. There's only 5 or 6 of them, maybe, who have the ability to do it. And probably only 2 of those have the right to exercise that ability if they are so inclined. So the idea that everyone's going to sound like Trump 4 years from now, forget it, because not everybody who has that skill runs for public office.
So, give your head a shake. If you're like me, it's full of stress-inducing political chaff, the result of midnight doom scrolling for the past several weeks. The American election campaign was a blizzard of jeremiads, a confection of obsessive emotion and apocalyptic culture war rhetoric supercharged by social media. Take a breath. Now take another one. Canada has an economy to manage, and it happens to be utterly integrated with the United States of America. That's actually literally true. Our supply chains are in fact the same. About $3.6 billion crosses the common border each day. Agriculture, manufacturing, services, all integrated. The cattle herd in America and the cattle herd in Canada are just about genetically identical. This is stuff that really matters, people. Happily, the leadership of both our political parties seem to have already taken that deep breath. Both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have declared that economic collaboration must and will continue, come what may. Our sponsor, CN, applauds that approach. Listen for a second to a few of CN's stats. 32% of CN freight traffic moves cross-border. 16% is entirely within the United States. CN employs 6,825 American railroaders. It operates 5,400 miles of routes in the U.S. It spends more than $4 billion on its operations there. To be clear, it is in everyone's interest, that cross-border trade and commerce continue unimpeded. Politics is politics, and most Canadians have, shall we say, another view. But the integrated economy is our way of life. In the weeks ahead, we'll hear all sorts of doomsday scenarios, just as we have for decades. But the truth is that millions of Americans and millions of Canadians interact and do business every week. And they do it in a competitive, rules-based system that acts to the benefit of all. It is, in fact, the envy of the world. So, onward, as they say. Kory, former Director of Comms to a Prime Minister, speeches or conversations?
I think conversations have always been more powerful. I think of how many times you've gone to Empire Club lunch or a Canadian club or, whatever, and you hear the speech from the podium and then they sit down for a fireside chat with a reporter or a business leader or something. The fireside chat is always where the good stuff comes out of. It is a more powerful way of communicating. But I think the modern version, and I don't think he touched on it directly in his article, but that I think is more where political communications are going in a campaign context, is the direct to your iPhone, strolling chat. Whether you're sitting in a car, whether you're walking around the Hall of Parliament or whatever. But you've seen Poilievre use this a lot. He's far from the only one who does. But that is, you're talking directly and personally to the person on their own phone in a more conversational tone. And I think that's kind of a modern version of what a effective political speech being pushed out to the public looks like. It's not such a set piece, drama, old world way. Although I agree with Scott, there's always going to be a role for those larger, more serious addresses. But if you're trying to explain what your position is on, I don't know, childcare, or what your position is on whatever the outrage of the day, what your position is on immigration, which probably warrants some more conversation. The directed camera. Hey, it's just you and me chatting, and I'm telling you this is what's going on, and it just seems more authentic and more in the moment, less rhetoric, less set piece, which I think makes it way more effective.
Jordan, one of the things that people like us tend to do is to jam key messages into politicians' heads when they're going out to do an availability. So not only this is what you need to communicate, but this is precisely how you need to communicate it. This is the exact phrase you need to use. Doesn't sound like that's maybe the right way to go.
Well, I think for a lot of people it's not, but as Scott said, for some people it is, because the skill set to be able to speak naturally while keeping a message in mind that's actually a pretty rare one. And that's one that, you see people who've mastered that. They're often people who've spent quite a long time in public life to get there. And they certainly didn't start out that way. So I do think that messages and talking points and things like that, those are tools that are going to be always useful, especially for people who aren't necessarily more naturally comfortable in that type of a speaking role. But yes, sometimes advisors, I think, do a disservice and they overcoach, and you can certainly see many, many examples of that. And that absolutely, that puts up a barrier between the speaker and the listener. And I think this was an interesting article, although, I really agree with Scott. I think some of the things in here that are good practice have always been good practice. And to me, the thing that is really animating maybe a difference in how people are hearing politicians is the medium. So as opposed to having everything mediated through earned media in traditional media, television reports, clips on the evening news, newspapers, now people are having it, especially younger people, overwhelmingly, it's coming directly to their phone, either through social media or through YouTube videos and things like that. And so those are different mediums. And I think that you're going to continue to have a place for those big speeches. And actually, I can think of a recent example we had here in Canada. So the speech that Wab Kinew gave during the campaign where he addressed crime and justice issues, that was, by a lot of measures, a very traditional type of political speech. But it was very important for his campaign. It was very helpful for his campaign. It clearly resonated and did a lot of things that needed to be done. And I think we have another interesting example that's recent. I don't know if you guys saw yesterday, but Prime Minister Trudeau put out a video about immigration. So this is I think, kind of a fascinating example in terms of what we're talking about.
When Paul Martin was Prime Minister, that would have been a speech.
Right.
Exactly. Scott would have sent him out there with a speech, a major repivoting on immigration. We're going to explain how we got there and how, right? That's what.
And he made a lot of pivots in that video. So 7-minute video. He went out. He took responsibility. He said mistakes were made. He did a lot of things that I think, I agree, in past times would have been in a speech. But I think it's an interesting example because he's giving these remarks. It's direct to camera. It is more conversational, but it was also quite scripted, right? And so you have an interesting example there because I think we've seen him, obviously we've seen him on a number of more conversational mediums in the last few months. We've seen him on podcasts. And I think that actually this is a really good example of where these rules maybe don't apply in quite the same way the person who wrote the article intended, because on those podcasts, at times, the Prime Minister has been dragged into some really unhelpful conversations that he's been unable to sort of pivot out of and keep kind of that tone of connection with the listener. Like, he hasn't actually really been that great at it in those mediums. I would say he was actually a lot better in this video in terms of maintaining an engaging conversational tone. And he did it through good scripting and production, right? So I think that, again, a lot of it is about like, what is the message? What is the context of what you're saying? And how is it going to be consumed? And those are always going to shape how those messages are heard from politicians.
I guess one of the things that maybe I thought I got out of this article was that I should be less afraid of mistakes in favor of authenticity, so that I should be less worried that a person will say that the person I'm putting out there will say something incorrectly or even say something that's unhelpful. But in the course of the whole process, they will have had the authenticity that is persuasive.
I think that's true. And I think that's always been true. But if the medium is the message, then it's more true now, I think, arguably. So I'll concede to that. Like, I think when you're talking about a short video or something on TikTok or something like that, definitely it moves in that direction. One of the reasons that all the cabinet ministers were talking about sound so stilted and scripted goes right to your point, David, because when they appear on Vashi or Dave Cochran's shows, they are not thinking about slamming a win. They are fundamentally there to not make a mistake. They are like, okay, well, I am the minister and they need to fill these chairs. We need to fill these airwaves. But your primary goal, like if you literally had an honest conversation with the people filling those roles, those ministers, and you said to them, which is more important to you when this 7 minutes is over, that you didn't fuck up or that you blew people away? As much as you want to blow people away, not fucking up is more important. And that's, but you can't win a campaign. You can't capture people's imagination by not fucking up. And so what you're going to see, I think, is, you're going to see more people moving this way. You're going to have a greater conversation. But again, it's always been that. The people who sound more conversational and more direct, more declarative and more authentic always get a bigger listen. But it's the medium, it's the message and the messenger. Trudeau, I agree with. I was going to raise it. His video is pretty damn good. He does have the skills to do that. He can pull that off. But the messenger is an anchor. So it's still him. So you have to look at it when people see the phone. It isn't that they look at it and they say, well, this person doesn't have the capacity to pull this off in the way that I like. It's like, it's that guy. So that's a drag. It isn't just medium and message. It also is messenger. And, but I'll tell you, like, in my view, I'll be really counterintuitive. And it's not just because I'm 56. I think that Trudeau would best be served right now to jolt people with a speech that is pre-sold and we're told in advance is something that people have to cancel their lunch, go home and watch. Reporters cannot afford to miss it. And he sits and he walks to a podium and in front of a crowd, whether it's the Canadian Club or Empire Club or whatever, shout out to my friend Colleen at the Canadian Club. I'd say choose the Canadian Club. And he gives a 25-minute speech on why he wants to stay as prime minister. He gives a passionate, authentic, direct speech saying these are the three things that won't happen if I'm not prime minister in the future that matter to Canada and that I'm desperate to do. And this, therefore, is why I need a new mandate and it has to be me. Not I want to complete the job on childcare, not pharmacare is more, not my values are better than his values. But what are the three things that Canadians get that he's desperate to deliver? And I think if that was a speech, if that was a video clip, I think whatever, it will get attention. But we haven't heard that from him. So don't overlook message. It matters.
The message is key, I think. Like if he went and gave that kind of speech and gave the answers that he gave Nate on his podcast, right, I'd say don't bother. But
don't bother.
But like I think there are a couple other elements that touch in this vein. One is using non-political language, like whether it's figures of speech but so much of what comes out is just such boring political boilerplate bullshit. And I think
Kory, some of the stuff the guy was talking about sounded like Doug to me.
Yeah.
Storytelling, humor, off the cuff comments.
Yeah, but like I think that's right. Just personality and authenticity, and like there isn't a way to inauthentically be authentic. Like you've got to, it actually has to be sort of you. But I think part of the communications magic of Trump is the ability to do two things: one, use non-typical language, and two, to overstep and then walk back, but walk back days later, or overwrite by something else that steps over. But it gets a huge amount of attention, and it's like, well, that's politicians don't talk like that. Politicians don't say things like that. Politicians don't take risks with jokes anymore. They don't take risks by doing interviews. Like think of what Trump did with Joe Rogan, who has sat down for 3 hours with a journalist in a political campaign ever. Like it's just so not done, right? And lots of criticism to Harris for not having done that, but let's not brush past how unusual it is to give that amount of time in an interview that is so free ranging and all the rest. Like very few people.
But it's always been true. Think about John McCain with the Straight Talk Express. That's why people liked him. He would sit on a bus, you shoot the shit with media, and sometimes he would fuck up, but it was no big deal because of the broader experience. It showed us something about him. So this
it's also the frequency of those appearances that allows the magic of that to work, right? Because you can go past things if you're speaking, and if you're out sort of 2-3 times a day, it's a lot easier to overwrite and move past things. And so I think that when you look at campaign strategy, and I think there are a lot of legitimate criticisms of Harris for not going on Rogan's show, and I think not angering certain people who have criticisms of Rogan's politics versus 11 million listeners an episode is sort of pretty compelling math. But also, when you're not out as often, you just have less opportunity to do that. And I think there's, it's funny, there's an irony when when Justin Trudeau talks about the special relationship that he has with Canadians, I think what he's really talking about there is that he feels that Canadians have an emotional connection with him because of his upbringing, because of his history. And he's right, they do. But the problem is that connection has really been lost, right? And so much of somebody's ability to be read as authentic by listeners is their ability to create and maintain some sort of parasocial emotional connection with voters. And I think Trump does that very well by being out there, by speaking unusually normally. There are other ways to do it, but it's not like a formula, right? You have to be out there. You have to think about, people are better than statistics, all of those types of things that I think when you're in government really slip away pretty quickly.
Okay, my last run at this is going to be, so Trump goes on Rogan for 3 hours and talks. What's more important from that exchange? That Trump delivers the 3 or 4 key messages he's been sent out there to deliver, that he syncs those things? Or the impression that he creates over the course of the 3 hours?
The latter.
Yeah, it's the impression, totally.
Sure, but not everybody's in that position at a given point in a campaign. There will be some people, there are some politicians that if I was advising them, I would not advise them to go on Rogan for 3 hours. I would never not do it because I would be afraid that it might upset some of our constituency internally. But if I didn't think that they could do it, like if they're the kind of person who has to search every time they're asked a question through the filing cabinet of talking points that they've been provided to find the correct answer, then don't do it, because you'll only be rewarded if you seem like you're a real person who has an authentic take and a declarative take the second somebody asks you something. Do you like Coke or Pepsi? You don't go, well, I mean, the advantages of Coke, of course, are X, and not to say that Pepsi doesn't have some strong advantages, blah, blah, blah. So,
don't forget RC Cola,
or it might be that they need to get certain things done. So, it's easy to say, why doesn't everybody do this? Partly it's because not everybody can do this. But it isn't that we've discovered some new mode of communication. It's just that we've been reminded how effective this mode of communication can be. And the unstated parenthetical observation is, and not everybody has that set of skills.
Well, there's also a little bit of campaign strategy. Like, are you running the Ming Vaz, front runner campaign, or are you having to swing for the fences to come from behind? So that, the amount of chances you're going to take, I think, is the other risk overlay. But certainly the bigger thing is what you said, Scott, that not everyone can do it.
Look, you go on TV 1,000 times, one time at least, you're going to say beer and popcorn. And then you're fucking blown to the moon. You blow yourself to the moon. I mean, that's the truth, right? Live by the smart ass, sharp, smart aleck comment, die by it. And so that's what a lot of campaigns fear. And particularly if you're 7 points ahead, you don't want to blow yourself up. So that's why you see people go Ming Vaz.
Well, beer and popcorn.
Not a problem Justin Trudeau Liberals have right now.
I've had a few of those, in fairness, too, Scott. I've got my pants on and,
What's the parallel? You make enough ads, you'll eventually make soldiers in the streets?
Right, exactly. We all love our greatest hits.
Okay, let's spend a couple of minutes taking seriously the notion that Trump might change things for Trudeau. So Trump appears to be dead fucking serious about being a change agent. Let's put it that way. If you look at his cabinet picks, and we won't use this time to get into that discussion because that requires alcohol. So let's just stick with what we know. What we know is that he's going to come out on the economy all guns blazing, and there are tariffs on the way, threatened or imposed. They're making it clear so there's an economic threat to Canada immediately out of this administration. They're going to start deporting people from the United States, which is going to offend some Canadians' sense of values and morals, and secondly, is going to create probably immigration crisis at our border. So these are just two things that will immediately happen, that will immediately allow the Canadian government to be in full-on battle mode against the Trump administration. So, given how Canadians normally see the Canada-US relationship, which is, well, it's fucking important, but B, we're different and better than those people, and Trump accentuates that. Jordan, explain to me why this fight is not an opportunity for Trudeau.
Well, there is opportunity in it. Look, I think the best thing that can be said about this for Trudeau is that it gives his government a purpose other than sitting and waiting for the NDP to swing the axe down, which is really that type of a death watch is what was facing them until this happened. So I think that sense of purpose is the single biggest and only opportunity there for them. I don't believe in magic around what this is going to do to Justin Trudeau's personal appeal, as we've already talked about at length. But look, now he has an opportunity to cast himself as a fighter for Canadian industries and jobs, as somebody who's going to take on some of the chaos that's coming from the Trump administration. And I think, to be very clear, what we're about to see after the inauguration is a level of disruption to the economic and social fabric of the United States and North America that's really unlike anything we've seen before. And if you look at the deportation question alone, this is really going to actually put the U.S. economy totally apart from the incredibly tragic humanitarian consequences that are going to flow from trying to deport 11 million people who have built lives in the United States. It's also going to send the U.S. economy into a tailspin. And so you have all of this disruption coming. And I think that preparing Canadians, defending Canadians in that relationship gives an orbit for this government that they have been so sorely lacking over the last couple of years. Now, the question is, are they actually able to take advantage of that? And this is really what I think we're going to see over the next couple months, whether they're actually able to spin those gears up that haven't been used in a while of cohesive government communications, whether Deputy Prime Minister Freeland is able to take her role in that and speak in a way that resonates with Canadians. I have my doubts. Her early efforts on this were not promising. So they have some challenges in terms of being seen to really grab that by the handlebars and drive it. And then they've got Pierre Poilievre on the side saying, look, I'm going to fight fire with fire with this guy. And I think there's very much a constituency for that message. So Trudeau has, he's got a tough road to walk there, but there is opportunity for him because at least it provides a cohesive focus. They can focus on jobs. They can focus on economic stuff. They can focus on managing this incoming crisis on immigration, which you're already seeing them do. But they have to be able to hold everybody on that and drive that message.
Kory, what do you think?
Yeah, I just think he's in such a weak position going into this. I think Trump's going to wait him out. I think he knows that he's deeply unpopular. Like, Trudeau may be uninterested in reading a poll, but clearly the Trump team is, and I think they're going to look past him. I don't think they're going to particularly engage in a fight with this guy, and I don't think the premiers are going to wait for Trudeau. I think you're seeing that already. I think Ford's statements around wanting to do a one-off deal with the Americans and push Mexico out of CUSMA, and Danielle Smith joining in on that. I think that's the kind of dynamic you're going to see more of. I don't think Trudeau has a mandate to do this work particularly. I don't think he has the credibility either internally within Canada or externally with the United States in order to actually deliver. And moreover, I think that Ottawa, like official Ottawa, is so constrained in its mindset and its imagination in terms of how to deal with Americans on this stuff that they won't say the obvious things that Ford and Smith have said. I think they're incapable of it.
Scott, what do you think? Answer the original question, but also what do you think the impact would be if Trump went out of his way to poke Trudeau in the eye personally?
Well, I think that will happen. I thought you were going to ask a different question, which I was going to mention.
A more interesting one? Go ahead. Ask yourself a more interesting question.
I thought it's, what if the Pope... No, but I think he will. I didn't mean it that way, although thank you for the opportunity to improve upon your work. what if Trump, in his vanity, it goes so far as to say that, he would prefer to work with someone else? I think that would actually, you can imagine Trump saying that. You can imagine he not only pokes Trudeau in the eye by being difficult, but also was like, I'm sick and tired of dealing with this woke asshole. I want to deal with Pierre Poilievre. And you might get more, Canada, if you put somebody else across the table from me. And I could see Trump's ego suggesting that he ought to do that. And I do think that actually could help Trudeau, because I think that would be uncomfortable for Poilievre, and will cause people to go, well, hang on, like somebody that 70% of Canadians don't like, who after January 20th might be taking steps that an increasingly large percentage of the population in Canada might be realizing this could be bad for me, saying I want that guy, not this guy. That could be bad for that guy if that guy's Pierre Poilievre. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to watch. I look at it this way. Trump's going to be so disruptive, so challenging to the established order. And I know he was president before, but I really think, these cabinet appointments are another demonstration that he is going to be Trump times 100. So when he says, I'm going to impose a 10 to 20% tariff across the board, he means it, and he will do it. And if official Ottawa-dom is trying to, secure like the notion of, well, I won't really go through with it, I think he'll do it. I think he'll do it on a point certain. And then it's going to unleash all kinds of geographical, political, interregional, intersectoral challenges. So what is any prime minister supposed to do the day after that happens? And Trump sits back and says, now come to me on bended knee, whole world and Canada included, and say, all right, well, we'll give you what you want on energy, or in order for us to preserve, we know you want our energy in order to preserve that. Well, then I guess we're going to surrender supply management. Or, and imagine the political tensions. Forget the fragility in the House of Commons. Imagine the political tensions that will unfold. Or Kory and his, pal Doug Ford are pursuing what I think is a shrewd tactic of saying, well, let's make common cause with the United States and point the finger at Mexico's playing footsie when it comes to EV manufacturing with China. They're the bad guy. Let's focus on that. Okay, sounds good. Except that Trump is still going after those EV subsidies, and he's going to. So what happens in Ontario when you're forced to pick between Quebec supply management, the auto and EV sector and subsidies in central Canada and Ontario, and energy in the West? And I know they're not exclusively those clean boxes, because they're going to put any prime minister in a tough spot. And he's going to do that prior to the renegotiation of NAFTA, FUSMA. And it's going to be like all those tensions that we paper over are going to be exposed bare. And Danielle Smith is going to be chomping at the bit. And Legault will be going crazy. And so I think one of the tricks for Trudeau, I think any prime minister is going to be in an impossibly difficult spot. I think Trudeau obviously is less popular, so that's going to make it even more difficult. Any attempt to stand up to Trump will be dismissed as, he's just grandstanding because he's in such a bad political spot. I think one of the tricks is he has to constantly place the onus on Poilievre, that any decision that Trudeau takes, any measure and response that Trudeau takes, he has to constantly say, now you run to the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and God damn it, you ask him, where does he stand? And don't let him duck the question by saying he's not prime minister yet. He wants to be fucking prime minister. If we held an election, he'd be prime minister in 36 days. So what would he do? And at least force some measure of accountability and discomfort upon Poilievre, because I think any prime minister is going to be in a very uncomfortable spot. But my overall answer to you, David, is it's not going to be the ray of hope that a lot of Liberals are imagining. I worry that the tensions that will be unleashed are so destructive, so uncomfortable for the community of Canada, that it's going to be an incredibly difficult thing to manage.
All right, cool. Let's move to our Hey Yous. Who's got one? First of all, Jesus, we can't do them without calling Gordon Pinsent to... Right? Mr. Pinsent, can you please reassemble the audience?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Jordan, you want to go first?
Yes, I have a Hey You this week, of course, going out to the one and only John Horgan. So We had some very tragic news this last week that John Horgan passed away far too young at 65. And I think really just a huge figure in Canadian politics, a huge figure actually even globally in his second act. And John from Langford, as he was known by so many, pragmatic, passionate, political person, and yes, passionate on all sides. I think the ability to yell also and have a good sense of humor is so important to success in politics, and he certainly had that. I never had the opportunity to work with him, but I have many friends who work very closely with him, and he was a very kind person. He was very human, and he had just a gift, a real ability to connect with voters and with people all across the political spectrum, and that's such a rarity, and I think a big part of what made him so grounded in his politics. He fiercely loved BC, and I think that came out in all that he did. And he was really just at the start of a fascinating second act, a career as Canada's ambassador to Germany. So I had the opportunity to cross paths with him in that role. And I think it's just such a huge loss. And so our condolences, I think I speak for everybody, our condolences going out to his political family, and also, of course, to Ellie, to his kids, Evan and Nate. Really gone far too soon, but will be remembered as one of the greats here.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking.
Hear.
Yeah. Hear. Scott?
My hey you goes in a different direction. It's directed at Carolyn Parrish, Mayor of Mississauga, who I've long thought was a fool. And she certainly underscored that this week when not only...
There's about 25 years of evidence to that point, is there?
There certainly is. And I know the demographics. I know the voting and electoral demographics of Mississauga. I understand that. But sometimes you ask a politician to rise above, and she always fails to meet that standard. So you want to have a vigil in Mississauga to the fallen Hamas leader, and she's excited and endorsing that prospect. And then she, in the course of the debate, compares him to Nelson Mandela. Then, of course, in typical fashion, when she's called on it, she denies it. She literally said, at no time, I'm going to quote, at no time was I equating the two. She said it was an allegorical comment. Well, first of all, what she said explicitly was, I am not being facetious. Nelson Mandela was declared a terrorist by the U.S. until the year 2008. Okay, so she did. And by the way, an allegory is a poem or a myth or a story that is intended to reveal a hidden truth. It is not an allegorical comment in any way, shape, or form. So, Carolyn Parrish, you are a disgrace.
You say that until that guy's made an honorary citizen of Canada.
There's no comparison between the two.
No, certainly not. Kory?
I want to use my hey you to give a little advice to Pierre Poilievre and the federal Conservatives. I thought the video from the Prime Minister on immigration that we were talking about earlier was a huge tell in terms of what their polling is showing on the immigration issue, and we've seen it in some of the public polling. This issue is exploding. And I think there is an opportunity to step into the breach and do some things on the policy side that the government should frankly do. And I don't think it's within, their imagination to bring forward. And I think the first and most obvious thing is we've got to bring in some exit controls at our borders. We need to know not just who's coming into Canada, but who's leaving, because we're about to embark on allowing millions of temporary foreign worker permits and student visas to expire. And we're going to need to know who left. And moreover, we're going to have huge tensions, I think, with the Trump administration around who is crossing the border and to the United States. And not all the people are going to be crossing in what the U.S. will view a legitimate fashion. We need to know when people are leaving the country. And far less sophisticated, less modern, less, instruments of state countries like, all of the Caribbean and Mexico have exit controls on their border. All of Europe has exit controls on their border. Why does Canada not have this? This is I think ABC's obvious gap in our border and immigration system. And I think the Conservatives should pick up the ball and lead on the issue. I think it's totally consistent with what Canada needs to do, and I think they're well positioned to advance it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks. My hey you goes out to Bonnie Crombie, who introduced a tax cut package. I like it. I think it's well designed. I think it's going to be easy to sell. I think it's aimed at the right audience. And I mean, I like it as a getting into competing with Ford on affordability stuff, but I really like it as a differentiator with the NDP. I really like it as going to a place on affordability that the NDP are going to be reluctant to go to and getting there first. And so, hey, you, Bonnie Crombie, that was a savvy move. All right, everybody, that's our show for this week. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, and our sponsor, CN Rail. I'd like to thank Jordan, Scott, and Corey for being here with me. Always fun. And all of you, Kirst, who watched or listened to this show, thanks for doing that. Go on the Apple ratings and review machine and give us a review if you feel like it, but certainly come back next week. We'll see you then.